Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Our program today is a town hall with Anthony Sabatini. We ask everyone to stay muted for the beginning of the program. And then if you ask a question, we ask that you please submit the topic in the chat, and Amanda will call on you to ask your question. If you don't have audio, please put no audio in the chat, then type your specific question, and Amanda will read it for you. We're very fortunate to have State Representative Anthony Sabatini with us this morning. Anthony represents District 32, which encompasses all of South Lake and part of North Lake. He assumed office on November 6, 2018, and has been very accessible to the chamber and our members. He graduated from the University of Florida with a bachelor's in history and philosophy in 2012, and he graduated from UF Law in 2017. He lives in Howey in the Hills with his wife, Francesca, and it is my pleasure to introduce State Representative Anthony Sabatini. Anthony?
Hey, thanks, Dave. Appreciate you guys having me on, and good morning, everybody. Thanks for waking up early and spending your morning with me. I'm up in Tallahassee today, and I'm up here because I've been on basically National Guard duty every day since the legislative session ended. But they do give me a few days off a week, so that's kind of nice. I come back and enjoy some of the restaurants in Claremont and Lake County now that I have a little bit more time on my hands a few days a week. And Dave asked me to come on and talk a little bit about what's going on in Tallahassee. So I think it's a good opportunity to talk about a little bit about what we did last session in Tallahassee, and then talk a little bit about what's happening now that session's over and our state is facing this very novel crisis that we're in right now, and then also what's going to happen next. Florida has a legislative session every year, 60 days. This year it ended on March 13th, which, as you remember, that was right when this whole COVID thing kind of blew up. And we finished it. Thankfully, the Speaker of the House was wise enough to include a lot of money in reserves. Actually, let me say one quick thing. I'm going to keep my introduction kind of short because I love questions, and I like to talk a lot during questions when I answer them. So I'll keep the introduction short, and then feel free to ask any questions you want, and we can have a conversation about those topics. But as I was saying, the legislature knew that the coronavirus was going to be obviously both an issue and the secondary effects, because the panic that was created was going to be an issue too. So we made sure to leave an enormous amount of money in reserves. So the state budget's $90 billion. We actually had over $4 billion in reserves just for this crisis. And of course for hurricane season, which, as you know, we're about to enter in about 2 weeks here. So long story short, we stuffed enough money away that we wouldn't have to come to an immediate special session. Now, the question of whether there's going to be a special session is still looming. And it's really a call of two types of people, the governor and the leaders of the House and the Senate. And so the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate may or may not decide to call a special session for various topics. There's a lot of topics that need to be dealt with. I think one of the most important for me would be tort reform, and obviously making sure we have enough money in our unemployment system to make sure everybody's taken care of as we go forward and this economy continues to recover. But back to the idea, back to what we did during session. So before the world kind of turned upside down in middle March, we had just finished our session. As a member of the Florida House of Representatives, the priority of the House going into negotiations with the Senate and the governor was really healthcare reform, making sure that the free market principles that drive costs down through the idea of competition and fairness and transparency were being implemented in Florida's healthcare system. For far too long, there has been little to no competition in the healthcare marketplace, and what that has done is basically driven up costs. It's made it almost like a monopoly where there's very little to no competition. Probably the most exciting bill to come out of this legislative session in general, but particularly in that field, was a bill 607, House Bill 607, which expanded the role of nurses in Florida. Independent skilled nurse practitioners who have been studying and have advanced degrees and who have a lot of expertise in their individual fields will now in Florida, and this has already been signed by the governor, be able to practice independently of doctors. For decades they couldn't. They had to stay under the supervision of doctors, even though really weren't being supervised. And a lot of the types of things that they were doing were outside of even what the doctors or hospitals were even watching. So now, because of that, they're going to be able to drive down the cost of a lot of typical healthcare procedures. I mean, just give you a kind of a random example. If you went to the hospital with a child with strep throat, it could easily cost $1,200 for the diagnoses and seeing the doctor. But a skilled nurse practitioner would see that same child for that same type of diagnosis for about $60, 60. So we're talking about thousands of percent difference in the cost of healthcare based on the fact that, you know, a lot of skilled practitioners were kept from being able to practice medicine in ways for many ways. And the reason that is to be quite frank, special interests in Tallahassee through the medical lobby have kept it that nurses weren't allowed to practice for many, many decades. There were a lot of bills like that. I want to bore you with them. I give you that as sort of an example into that field and what the House was prioritizing over the not only this year but the last year during this 2-year term. Obviously, some of the more high-profile things that get a lot of media attention were the environmental spending. Once again, we're at almost $700 million in environmental spending, $100 million for Forever Florida. That's the land buying program to buy environmentally sensitive lands around our state and protect them for future generations. A state employee pay increase of 3%, a teacher pay increase, which is going to be big for Lake County. It's going to bring every starting teacher to $47,500 in our county and counties around us. And that's good for medium, semi-urban counties and rural counties like Lake County, because our starting teacher pay was far underneath some of the more urban counties. And because this bill is going to make every county equal in that regard, it benefits Lake County more than it does, say, for example, Orange County. Those were some of the exciting bills, and that they got a lot more media attention. Sanctuary cities was a big one, making sure that Sanctuary cities was last year. This year was E-Verify. E-Verify making it that any employee who applies for a job in Florida is a legal citizen. Of course, that drives up wages, because we're making sure that employers are the ones that are hiring actual Floridians and legal citizens, which increases their wages because they're not competing with illegal labor. So we're pretty excited about that bill. The governor's expected to sign that too. All of the bills that we passed this year are expected to be signed either later this month or at the beginning of next month, including the $91 billion budget. That's just kind of a real brief cursory overview of what we did. I particularly was focused on reducing government. It's really one of my interests in Tallahassee, legal and sort of legal focus and commerce focus, and then local government focus, making sure the government's not getting in the way, that we don't have too much red tape, and that businesses are able to succeed with the least amount of impediments as possible. We could talk a little bit more of that if you want to ask an open-ended question about it. I'm happy to talk a little bit more in detail. But if you guys would like, I'm fine going right into questions.
Okay, Anthony, Donna Kirtland has a question. She said, is there any opportunity for a similar bill with paralegals providing basic civil legal aid, much like nurses can now provide general practice without being under a doctor?
Thank you for the question. That's an amazing idea. I'm fully in support of it. See, the issue of nurses versus doctors is not a novel or unique phenomenon. Every trade, every field, every marketplace has this internal dynamic where you have people who are slightly more skilled using guilds and special interests to lobby the legislature to decrease competition by saying, okay, these people are not allowed to compete with us. They can do these things, but we can do these things. And another example of this is the pharmacists. So the pharmacists, once again, also headbutting with hospitals and doctors constantly. This year, one of the most exciting bills, and one of the few bills to already be signed by the governor, is a bill that allows pharmacists to diagnose certain types of very typical illnesses such as strep throat, and also diagnose people who have flu and give flu shots. And that was long overdue. And thankfully that finally passed this year. Ironically, the timing was perfect with everything going on right now with COVID. Those pharmacists are going to be able to do more. But I'm using that as an example to illustrate the question. The question is, should paralegals be able to practice more outside the current confines that basically the Supreme Court, the Florida Bar, and the statutes of Florida have disabled them from doing? Totally agree with you. As a lawyer myself, I think lawyers, there's a lot that paralegals can do that they're being restricted from now. So if you want to do a follow-up question by email, I can talk to you a little bit more detailed about it. But in general, broadly, I'm very in favor of allowing paralegals or even average individuals, through business, to offer some of the really basic services that lawyers exclusively offer now, which of course is one of the things driving up the price of lawyer fees. The price of getting a lawyer is extremely unaffordable in the state of Florida and across the country. Most people just simply cannot afford it, and even legal services are stretched. So totally agree with that and support it. Sorry if that was a long answer.
Great, thank you. Kevin Wright has a question. Kevin, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you so you can ask that. Kevin, you're unmuted.
Hey, Anthony, Kevin. Actually, I had two, but the first one, I'm asking this one on behalf of Chance John Meyer in the Recall, Florida. Is there a chance that we in the movement will be able to pick up some sponsors so that we can go beyond the 20 counties that have the ability to recall elected local officials for cause?
Sure. Thanks for the question. For those who are listening that don't know exactly what he's talking about, it's about the recall statute in Florida. We have a very specific one. If you're unhappy with an elected official at the local level or at various different levels, there's a specific statute that allows you to recall them. But of course, it's very difficult. You have to get 20%. There's very strict legal cause for doing so. And if the question is, am I in favor of expanding the type of grounds that you can recall for? Absolutely, because at the end of the day, I'm always going to be for more voter choice, more voter control. And so expanding it is totally fine, both the legal cause, the requirements, that sort of thing.
Kevin, did you want to ask your second question?
Sure. Thank you, Anthony. One thing that's become abundantly clear during the COVID-19 crisis is that something that's always been a problem, but it came out, is the Florida sunshine laws. They're not meeting their intended purpose. In fact, a lot of in my county in particular, but I know it happens elsewhere, local governments and organizations like commissions have been rendered dysfunctional out of fear that they will violate the sunshine laws and they'll face civil suits for doing so. I had a meeting back before we went into this. I had a city councilman and county commissioners, but because the government did not hold that meeting, they were afraid to talk about policies or issues. And so the public that was there couldn't hear this discussion amongst those folks. I understand back in 2014, it was introduced, it got nowhere. But the Florida sunshine laws are not meeting their intended purposes. Do you think there would be any political will up in Tallahassee to take on, revise, and so they can fulfill its intended purpose?
Thanks for the question. Great question. For those who are familiar, local government is put on a completely different standard than state officials. Since the 1970s, local government officials in the state of Florida have a very restrictive set of meeting requirements, often referred to as the Sunshine Law, that allows public interaction basically before they can even speak to one fellow commissioner on the same board. It made sense in a pre-technology world. Those laws are grossly outdated. And I think it's also very hypocritical that local governments are handcuffed from having these conversations and doing things, whereas the state legislature, who obviously is a little bit more powerful, is free of those same restrictions. So yes, I totally agree with updating, modernizing, and even limiting some of those sunshine laws that whose purpose I agree with, but the method has become a nuisance. There was an effort to do so 2 years ago. It fell short just a few votes in the House because it needs a 66% vote to pass. I plan on fighting to support the modernization of sunshine laws either this year or next year. We're very limited in the bills we can file. We only get 6 years. I'm going to try to squeeze it in this year, but thanks for the question.
Okay, the next question, Cheryl Cohen, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you so you can ask your question.
Thank you. Hi, Anthony. How are you?
Never been better. Good to see you again.
Thank you. I have a big question and concerns what is happening about education. What is the scuttlebutt on Tallahassee? What does it look like for the fall reopening? And are they addressing the large number of staff and faculty that are actually over age 60 and that are prevented from coming back currently because of CDC guidelines? Can you address any of that?
Sure. Thanks for the question. Kind of a two-part question. I'll answer the easier first one. Obviously, the big exciting issue for the session when it came to education was the beginning teacher pay of $47.5, which also had a component of about an extra $100 million to help more experienced veteran teachers get equality in their pay schedules too. And I'm pretty excited about that. Obviously, that's something I think all Floridians would like to see. And with the extra money that we've gotten from the federal government through the CARES Act, we know for certain that there's not going to be any changes in this year's budget, and that teacher pay and all the other great things that the budget spent money on are going to go unchanged. So that's a good thing. Concerning next year, obviously, we're now rolling into the new standards. Now that Common Core has been deleted, hopefully we get something that makes a little more sense, a little more popular with voters, and gives a little bit more control to the districts, how they implement these standards, which I'm a big fan of, devolution of power. And then, the other question I think is a more difficult one, which is a really technical question, which is how are we going to be able to open up the classrooms, get students back in there without risking the vulnerable population of our teachers and injury to them and harm to them. And obviously that's a very technical question. I know we can do it. It's just going to be a well-constructed plan. And I think implementing maybe some of the, and taking away some of the ideas we got from this whole virtual school phenomenon that we've all been engaged in over the last 30 days, maybe using teachers for certain teachers for virtual schooling who would be vulnerable, but obviously are good teachers and have learned how to teach remotely, and then opening up classrooms for other students. I don't believe the school should have completely closed. I was okay with some of the classes closing and students learning remotely, but overall I would have liked to see the burden that some parents have faced be basically alleviated by allowing some of the kids to come to school, and then some of the teachers or young people who are a little bit more vulnerable. And of course, what I mean is the school system would still take every precaution, cleaning, masks, all that, do whatever to keep it open, keep it safe. But I wouldn't like to see the school closed. Going to fall, we know that they're going to be open again. And it's a question that DOE is going to have to provide, and then the legislature will provide feedback. But if you want to talk more about it, feel free to give me an email. But once again, it's going to be a technical plan that they have to construct.
Okay, the next question is from James Coate. James, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you.
Good morning. I just had some questions about the reopening process. I know you've been pretty vocal about wanting everything open right away, and I'm curious how that comes into play for people who are at risk, either older people who are expected to return to work, or those with pre-existing conditions that puts them at a higher risk. What sort of, I guess, advice do you have for people who the CDC and the state and the federal government recommend continue to stay isolated when they will potentially either lose unemployment or not have any source of income if they're forced to go back to work?
Thank you for the question. Let me start very broadly and philosophically talking about it. I said as early as late March, and I believe to this day, and I think history is going to be on my side here, that we should have always, at the national, state, and local level, always focused on the vulnerable and not the 85% of Florida that's not vulnerable. I believe that treating everyone exactly the same is sort of a dull and just a silly way to go about this issue. So to answer your question, what do we do about the people who can't go back to work, or there's obviously a heightened risk? First, let me state that they were actually never told to completely and totally isolate. It was simply don't do any unnecessary travel, and if you work in a so-called non-essential business, we suggest that those close for a short period of time. Obviously, that's all ended now. The only thing still closed are bars and tattoo shops, that sort of thing. But I do believe that the government does have the ability, and as they've shown and as they've done, to help these people who are vulnerable through some sort of reemployment assistance, skills training, whatever it be, to basically make sure that, they're taken care of in this limited period. And they have. My problem with the state government's approach is basically they treated the 85% of Florida that's non-vulnerable exactly the same. It's actually more unfair to the vulnerable because it's lessened the type of help that they can get, or the precautions that they would usually have to, take care of going under. And, everybody is burdened by the fact that we've shut down the entire economy and had shut down the entire economy. And to this day, we're still in only 50% occupancy for a lot of things. There's a lot of takeaways from this. History's going to, study it. And I think we're all going to come to a consensus at some time. Right now, it's too politically charged. But we do know one thing that's apparent in this immediate moment, which is states that are opening up like Florida are seeing a decrease in cases, not an increase. So what does that tell you? It means the lockdowns did not work. In some cases, they probably exacerbated the spread of COVID-19, and that opening up the economy actually has seen a decrease in those cases. So overall, to answer your question very specifically, we need to do what we can to help the vulnerable populations, but we don't need to treat the non-vulnerable the exact same way.
Our next question is Karen Combs. Karen, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you.
Thank you. I have some specific concerns about the mask mandates, rights of those who cannot wear a mask for medical reasons. And also, to go along with that, every county across the state of Florida seems to have, and sometimes cities have, different regulations. If you want to travel, it's really a nightmare to try to figure it out. Has the governor or Tallahassee thought about trying to make things a little bit more similar for the residents of Florida? And how are they going to protect people's rights?
Thank you so much. It's a great question. You bring up a unique phenomenon in Florida politics. We're the third largest state, 21.5 million people. And so we have a constant overlap of competing regulations in every jurisdiction, 67 counties, 412 cities, innumerable, over 1,000 special districts, each with lawmaking ability. It's very difficult. So I'm actually constructing a letter right now, and I hope that the governor acts on it, which would create more uniformity. I think overall the governor's done a decent job with this whole thing, but one element of power I feel like he's failed to exercise that would have helped us a lot is by basically, outside of maybe Miami, requiring conformity among some of these local government regulations. And the mask one is obviously very pernicious. I'll take my legislative hat off for 1 second, but my lawyer hat on. I'm actually in a lawsuit now with Seminole County because I personally don't believe that government can mandate the wearing of masks. I think it violates several parts of our Constitution. And it's a stretch to say that it's really related to a pure emergency versus mitigation for public health in the future. I'm going to, like I said, constructing a letter, but it's totally in the hands of the governor right now, whether he wants to, through the stroke of the pen, limit some of the competing or confusing regulations that some of the cities and counties have created throughout the state. He's been a little hesitant to do that. It's one of my criticisms of him, but I don't believe that they should do that. Now, of course, if a business or an individual want to wear a mask, I appreciate their concern and their effort. They should have the right to do so, but it shouldn't be the realm of government to mandate it, especially through an arrest. Of course, in places like Alachua County, you can be arrested, or even Seminole County, if you don't wear a mask in these retail stores. Completely, I think, a ridiculous move by government, particularly local government. But hopefully that answers your question. It's going to be in the governor's hands. As a legislator, I've been probably the most vocal in the state on this issue, and I'll continue to be so. But it's really in our governor's hands. Feel free to try to reach out to him.
Okay, the next question is from Laura Roscoe. She wants to know if you could tell us the thoughts in Tallahassee about mandatory COVID vaccines.
Yeah, it's not going to happen. I'd be shocked if that discussion even occurred. Now, of course, in some states in this country, you're going to probably see those conversations occur. But mandatory vaccination is a political question. There's not going to be a palate for that at all, really, I don't think. And you're not going to see that, at least not in this current political environment. In fact, if I could say something on that, if you look at the polls, people's appetite for these precautions and the shutdowns and all this is sinking like a ship. And people want to just take they wish we would have taken the Sweden approach of just keeping us open, protecting the vulnerable, closing the nursing homes and large gatherings, but not doing everything we can to protect every single individual to the fullest extent, when we know that the mental health results and other health related outcomes are going to be even more worse than COVID-19 once the lockdowns are completed.
Okay, the next question is from Sherry Spivey. Sherry, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you.
Okay, I'm really glad to see that the state is increasing beginning teacher pay. However, I know for a fact that 47.5 is more than some teachers who have 10 and 15 years experience in Lake County alone. And so I'm just asking you to kind of expand on the plan the state has as far as helping to increase the teacher pay of the experienced teachers, because those experienced teachers, having been an educator myself, those experienced teachers really help and prop up those beginning teachers sometimes for a couple of years, just to help them maneuver and figure out the whole system. And it's very discouraging for a big experienced teacher to know that this person that you're helping out so much is making $7,000 more than you are, and you're having to work 3 jobs in order to be able to pay your bills.
Great question. No, I mean, I'll speak very bluntly. I think it was a clumsy approach. The House and the Senate differed in their versions. The House wanted to get $500 million for starting teacher pay, $150 million for senior teachers, which would have fixed, some of the compression where it would have been enough to make it that no teacher was making less than the starting. It still would have been, obviously overall a little unfair to the much more experienced teachers, but it would have at least gotten rid of that immediate problem of making less money than the starting teachers. The Senate rejected that offer. They still took some money, and the way the formula is written, the school district should still have the flexibility to make it that no teachers are making less than the starting teachers. It's still a little unfair, but it's one of those issues where, either they don't get this. I mean, the governor's priority was getting the new teacher paid as $47.5. Like I said, they gave enough flexibility to get rid of the issue immediately of teachers making less than that. We still have the issue to face about senior teachers who put a lot more time in, who are a lot more experienced, not making it, not being treated equally in the sense of how much time they put in. It's going to be an issue for next year. Just be vocal. I'm very sympathetic to it. Like I said, the House had the better plan, but it was rejected. And the flexibility is there, but we'll try to take a bigger swing at it next year.
Okay, the next question is from Rafael Neves. He wants to know, given the unprecedented overreach and abuse of power by mayors as well as the governor with their avalanche of arbitrary executive orders, would you sponsor and or support a state constitutional amendment limiting the emergency powers of the executive at the city, county, and state level, or at the very least making them subject to legislative approval and renewal?
I totally agree with that, and I appreciate your approach, and you're speaking my language. But in fact, next year we're going to be tailoring. I'll probably take a 2 or 3 year approach towards reforming the emergency management statute in Florida, which really hasn't been that used other than hurricanes. So this is the first real larger crisis in which it's been utilized, and I think there's been some serious constitutional flaws in it. I think next year my focus is going to be on restraining, like you mentioned, the local government usage of the Chapter 252 of the Florida statutes, the State Emergency Response Act, and the county element in Chapter 125. And then the following year, the year after, we'll take a swing at what it is the executive is allowed to do. Right now, I think it is unconstitutional. I think the difference between essential, non-essential business and a free capitalist society is an arbitrary one that would be probably struck by courts. And I think that the ability to make law, criminal law, which a person could be arrested and put in jail for immediately at the whim of a governor or a county commissioner, violates Article 3, Section 2 of the Florida Constitution, separation of powers. So there's all types of issues. And yes, we'll be filing a bill on that next year. Stay tuned.
Okay, our next question is from Stephanie Duke. Stephanie, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. For some reason, she's not unmuting.
I saw her text a question earlier.
Yeah. Stephanie, can you try and unmute on your end? There you go.
I'm muted now.
You're unmuted, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Hello, Representative Sabatini. How are you doing?
Never been better. Good morning, Stephanie.
Hi. My question is from, I have some constituency questions here on the unemployment. Several of them filed for their unemployment and still have not received any information. The question that they wanted to know is, have you reached out to the Department of Economic Opportunities to see about your constituents here in the 32nd District? And if so, what have you done to ensure that their claims will be addressed and very soon? And second part question, are you in favor of filing a bill, should you return to the state legislature, that will increase the minimum wages that they receive for unemployment insurance, as many of them have not been able to get by on the checks that they have yet to receive?
Thank you for the questions. Great questions. I'll take the first one, then the second one. The first one is, what have we done? What have we done? What's the strategy if we reached out? The answer to all those subparts is yes. I honestly, I hate to boast, but I do believe I have the hardest working staff on this issue in Central Florida. As we speak, both of my staffers, Jason Carter and Amanda Geltz, so you can call or email anytime at my office in Claremont, are working 10-hour, 12-hour days and putting now thousands of people into the unemployment system. Thankfully, we have a system, a spreadsheet system that DEO created for each representative, that anybody who has an outstanding issue, who hasn't been paid in, let's say, a month or so, we can put them in, get an immediate a record of where they are in the system within 48 hours, input them, and honestly, usually within 72 hours, they'll have their unemployment check. The unemployment system was a complete wreck. Obviously, it was in place long before I was elected in 2018. And I'm looking forward to litigation suing the company and the people who were involved on a personal level who created this, essentially a fake system. It was terrible. But more importantly, in the immediate, yes, we've been helping thousands of people get the unemployment assistance they need. Thankfully, they've all been satisfied. There's been almost 2 million claims made through DEO to the governor for unemployment. 3/4 of them have been processed. About 60% have been paid out already. And I think we're going to be closing the gap on everybody by late next week, which is pretty exciting. I think actually, although he's got negative criticism, that's probably the part of the job I think DeSantis has done better on, because he took a system that essentially did not exist. It was a disaster. And within a few weeks, they built a system and got it going. Like I said, anybody can call me personally on my cell phone, 352-455-2928, or email me, and I'll connect you with my staff who will get your application immediately, or just stop by my office in Claremont if you need to do a paper application. Your second part is, do I believe they should get paid? Yes. I believe that yes. I believe that the unemployment pay that they get paid should be tied to, cost of living, per capita, et cetera. So, it's at $275. It's been that way for years. So with inflation and all that, it should be going up. More importantly, if we open up the economy and, didn't close the economy, or at least large sectors of it, which had no rational connection to decreasing spread of COVID, we wouldn't have as many people on unemployment. So that's really the focus. But as a secondary concern, yeah, we should be, increasing the unemployment check, as $275 isn't cutting it. I agree with you.
Okay, the next question is from Joseph Leitenberger. He wants to know, isn't telling a teacher they can't come in because of age a form of age discrimination? Teachers have a right to earn a living. They also possess the ability to say they don't want to go back. Counties will use that to cut their retirement requirements for those that have worked for it.
Great question. No, I don't believe that school boards or DOE, Department of Education, should be restricting teachers who do want to come to the classroom and teach and all that. I was for never really closing the schools. Of course, that's more of a school board administrative and Secretary of Education question. The legislature has some authority, but not a lot, per the Florida Constitution. A lot of those questions have to be answered by the school board and the Department of Education, and we don't have complete oversight over it. But and I'm sympathetic to your concern. And I do believe teachers should have the ability to, go teach. And I think if restaurants could be open, schools should be open, spread people out, use masks, clean classrooms, and take every precaution, but they should not be just closing it indiscriminately like they have done.
Everyone's asking if you could say your number again.
352-455-2928. That's my cell phone. I get about 400 calls a day, so if I don't pick up, just know I'll check the voicemail. And if I don't call you back immediately, I might disconnect you with my staff, who will help you with your application. But I haven't got any calls since I started this conference. Please don't call right now because it'll cut through the Zoom. You know what I'm talking about? It'll actually cut the Zoom off, and then I have to push the button. But when the Zoom is over, feel free to call or text.
Okay.
Thank you.
The next question is from Kim Norberg. Kim, I've unmuted you. Kim? Kim, do you want to go ahead and ask your question? Okay, I'll just go ahead and ask what she had typed in there. The state unemployment website doesn't work consistently, and there aren't enough call takers with the ability to assist callers. Governor DeSantis blames the applicants. My friends and neighbors need help. I see other state reps working tirelessly to help their constituents obtain the unemployment benefits they've paid for and now need. What exactly are you doing to help Lake County residents?
Sure. I mean, I do believe that most of that question was answered 2 questions ago about the unemployment question that Ms. Dukes asked. Like I said, we've done thousands of applications. We're doing emails and phone calls all day. And then my staff gives me a summary every day at 5:30, letting me know what they did, who they dealt with, et cetera. And I can tell you that for the last 40 plus days, it's been their sole focus with a little exception. The governor's comment, I believe, was in regards to the 0.03% of people who applied in March who still haven't been paid, which, I mean, that's still a sizable number compared to how many people it is. I don't really have any information on that. I don't know if that was accurate. I just saw the headline like most people did. I don't believe we should be ever, blaming an applicant if that's how it was interpreted. I'm not sure if he meant it that way. But anybody who has not been paid, I don't think there's any constituents who've been waiting that long in District 32, but they have. Please call my office immediately, and we'll do everything we can to take care of you as fast as possible. And like I said, it's usually a 72-hour turnaround if it's people who have been waiting that extent of time. Thanks.
Okay, Sherry Spivey does have another question. Sherry, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you.
Yes, another question towards the employment question. What should people do who were mandated to close? For example, like hairdressers and different things like that, who have applied for unemployment and have been denied benefits. What recourse should they do? Should those people be contacting your office to give them some assistance? Because I personally have friends that are struggling with this very thing, that they did apply and they've been denied.
Thanks for the question. If there was an error in that, I mean, if they own a small business, they're not having any income coming in, they're immediately out of work, there should be no reason why they cannot apply, especially if they were working, obviously, going into this recession. Tell them to call. We'll check the law. We'll check the guidelines. And maybe we need to reapply. Maybe on their application, they didn't make it clear their current fiscal situation. And yeah, please feel free to have them out. We've had only a very small number of people who were completely and totally denied. Usually it has something to do with the fact that they're out of state, they're on maybe an out-of-state benefit, that sort of thing. But yeah, please feel free to have them call my office, and we'll double check all their information and track them in the system. Thank you.
Okay, Stephanie Dukes has another question. Stephanie, you're unmuted.
Okay. Another constituent asked the question this past weekend having to do with the election relief funds from the federal government, and wanting to know, had you supplied a letter of support to the governor asking for funds for the SOE to support our upcoming elections, and specifically, once those funds go to the state, that a sub-grants are given, particularly to our Lake County Supervisor of Elections and the other 66 counties. What is your position?
Great question. I speak to our Supervisor of Elections every month in Lake County, Mr. Alan Hayes. He hasn't come to me on this very topic yet. Obviously, we have a few months before the primary, almost six before the full election. I'm sure it'll be on his topic, and I'll be more than happy to support his priorities. I usually defer to him on matters of election. And I've seen some newspaper headlines on this federal grant that exists, and I'm more than happy to learn more about it. But I actually haven't really geeked out on it yet because it's just usually not my realm. I'm not on the State Affairs Committee, which is the committee in the House that usually focuses more on elections. But I'm probably going to be having a conversation with our supervisor of elections in Lake County, Alan Hayes, soon on the topic. So thanks.
All right, the next question from Kim Norberg actually kind of piggybacks off that a little bit. Our county supervisor of elections may face a shortage of election workers this fall due to COVID-19. This could reduce the number of voting precincts and prevent some people from voting. Do you support statewide vote by mail?
Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure we have vote by mail. We have some of the best vote by mail laws in the country here in Florida. You don't even need cause to vote by mail. I vote by mail simply because of the convenience of it. So in general, yeah, I certainly support vote by mail efforts. I like it. And, I get my ballot very early, and that way it gives more time to due diligence to go through. Sometimes there's a special election or something I'm not too know too much about on, so it gives me more time to research and reach out to others. And it's exciting to get your ballot when you're on the ballot. So I get it super early anyways and mail it in. So yes, I definitely support that. I think the national narrative on vote by mail is really oriented towards other states because Florida's been ahead of this for a while.
Okay, we have another question from Stephanie. Stephanie, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you.
Okay. Another constituent has asked, in the last legislative session, was there anything that addressed the increasing health crisis concern of teen vaping, the nicotine addiction, and the opioid epidemic?
Yeah, the Attorney General's taken a big lead on fighting through lawsuits and criminal prosecution, the opiate phenomenon, which is still looming and still one of the big focuses of, our Attorney General. I'm on the Criminal Justice Committee. We have a lot of conversations about it. Obviously, I support all her efforts. I think it's really important. I think we need to be focused on opiates as opposed to other things. I'm the only Republican in the Florida House that's pro-recreational or decriminalization, rather, of marijuana in our state. Ironically, I'm the only Republican that's drug tested every month as a member of the Florida Army National Guard. So I can tell you I don't partake in it, but I do believe it should be legalized. And the focus of our law enforcement should be on opiates and more serious drugs and not petty things like marijuana.
Okay, our next question is from Colleen Donlevy-Burns. Colleen, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you.
Hi there. I was reading in the newsletter that Lake County is charging $85 for swab tests for the COVID-19, where I had heard in Miami they weren't charging for the swab tests at all. And in addition to that, since there is a fee, I was reading that Lake County did have $20 subsidizing, and they discontinued that. Why?
Unfortunately, great question. Good to see you again, Colleen. Unfortunately, that's a county commission call. The chair of our county commission, I believe, contracted with some private medical entities to allow for people to go get testing. I don't agree with that. I think there are entities. If you reach out to my office, there's a way people can get a free test. Obviously I'm for private providers if they want to charge for whatever good or service they're offering. That's a free, that they're free to do so. But people who can't afford it, there's avenues for that through the Lake County DOH, Department of Health, to get a COVID test. And there's been billions of dollars provided by the federal government for this very purpose. So, like I said, that's the county commission. I'm a state legislator, so the county commissions basically, I think, stood up a private group to do this sort of testing. But I just know, and I do know that they're at one point charging $20, which, once again, I mean, if people need it, we're not trying to throw roadblocks up. There's the reason why state and federal funds have been provided for this very purpose. But once again, I think it's something you have to reach out to the county commission about, because they're the ones who stood that up.
Okay, Stephanie Dukes has another question, and this one is regarding the Equal Rights Amendment. Stephanie, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you.
Thank you again. This past legislative session, Florida could have become the required 38th state for the ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment to the United States Constitution. Representative Sabatini, where did you stand on HCR 239?
Thanks for the question. I'm a firm believer in equal rights among men and women, and thankfully the Florida Constitution has essentially an equal rights amendment in it. I believe in section 2 or 9, where men and women are treated equally. I believe the federal one would probably lead to just even more litigation, and I'm against anything that would restrict the ability for an employer to pay a woman more than a man. Unfortunately, it would lead to the point where if an employer wanted to pay a woman more, there would be a lawsuit by the man. So you would have litigation on both sides. But I think the one that's in the Florida Constitution is constructed correctly and isn't being interpreted in a way that's just going to lead to endless employment, trial lawyer litigation, and destroy small business. More importantly, women are attending college at a higher level, healthier than women, they're healthier than men, living longer than men, attending college more than men. And in about a few years, they're going to be more paid than men. So actually, funny enough, the Equal Rights Amendment has the perverse effect of holding women back once they've achieved more economic parity in the future.
Can I have a follow-up to that, please?
Sure.
From my reading of the bill, the amendment, it says equal rights for men and women. So would that not just mean that it's equal pay for equal work and not so much it has to do with sex? Because I believe that's what the amendment's supposed to do, take the sex out of it. Correct me?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, your very common sense, plain view of it, which I share and I sympathize the way you look at it, isn't exactly the way that endless amounts of trial lawyers and courts are going to interpret it, as they're fighting constantly over money. And I just pulled up the Florida Constitution, which says all natural persons, female and male alike, are equal before the law and have inalienable rights, including the ability and right to enjoy life, liberty, pursue happiness, and then this is the important part, to be rewarded for industry. And then it goes on. So that's basically we have an Equal Rights Amendment in the Florida Constitution. But thanks for the question.
That was our last question that we had in the chat. So if you have any final thoughts, please go ahead and share those.
Sure. Like I said, I give you my cell phone, email. Feel free to call or set up an appointment to meet with me anytime. I'm in Tallahassee 5 days a week, unfortunately, right now. So I'm not back that often, but usually Mondays and Tuesdays I am. I'm very proud of the work that we did last session for all Floridians, and I'm looking forward to getting back. And I'm actually in favor of a special session to do things like pass tort reform to make sure there's not endless litigation on COVID and some other really important updates we need to do to Florida law, including changing our emergency statute so there's less constitutional infringement and abuse by local government officials. But that's in the future. For now, I'm focused really on helping people get the reemployment assistance they need. And I really enjoy all the questions you guys have. I'm looking forward to the allowance of large gatherings so we can do some more legislative recaps coming into the summer. And I appreciate you guys spending your morning with me, and I look forward to talking with you soon.
All right, thank you, Representative Sabatini. There was another question that was geared more towards the chamber. Cheryl wanted to know what changes we are making for the Hobnob this year per COVID-19. We are going to be announcing that in the coming week. We are going to make that a virtual event because of everything surrounding COVID, and just we don't know how many people we can have in a room at one time. So there will be information in our newsletter and on our website in the coming weeks. Thank you again, Representative Sabatini, for joining us today and answering all of our questions. This recording will be posted later today on our Facebook page, our website, and our YouTube channel. Thank you again, and have a great day.
Sure.